the recording right now. So good morning, everybody. My name is Emily Bands. I will be presenting the webinar today. My colleague Shelly Bookbinder is actually here as well. She's not on video at the moment, but she will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, please make sure that you put them in the chat box and myself or Shelly will answer them. Just to give everybody a little bit of an overview, I know that we've done this, I think every training, but this week is our fourth webinar. And today we'll be focused on the individual service plan and applying the SMART framework to the individual service plan. Next week, we're going to be looking at individual service plan in terms of intervention development. Shelly is going to be presenting that next week. And then finally on August 11th, I'm going to be presenting on providing and documenting services, and that will be the end of our 6-week webinar. So we're nearing the end, everybody. I know that anybody out there is wondering, we do record this presentation, as I said. In addition, we send the slides over to Washington State Healthcare Authority. They're responsible for sending out the recording and for sending out the PowerPoint slides. If you haven't had access to those quite yet, I'm sure that they will eventually be coming out, but everything has been sent to them. So just some training basics. Please make sure that you connect to audio. We are going to be doing a breakout activity this week. So you will be going into breakout groups. So if you would like to participate in the breakout group, which I will encourage or would encourage everyone to do, please make sure you connect to audio. You can call in. This is the meeting ID number. Shelly, if you wanted to put that in the chat box for everybody. Or you can just use your computer audio, okay? But those are your two options. Everybody should be muted. You can choose to have your video on or off, but I do ask that if you do have your video on and you choose to have your video on, that you do be, respectful of your own privacy as well as everybody else's privacy. In addition, please use the chat box to ask questions. We will also be responding to questions in the chat box. We like to make these webinars interactive, so it's one of the reasons why we're also monitoring the chat box. As a presenter, I might be answering questions directly in the chat box. It's to keep things interactive. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat box. If you would like it to just go to myself and Shelly, you can select all panelists. If you would like it to go to everybody, please select all panelists and all attendees. And then again, for the final time, just so everybody knows, this webinar is being recorded and the slides in the recording are going to be sent out by the Washington Healthcare Authority, okay? Thank you, Shelly. Shelly just put in the call-in information as well as the meeting ID into the chat box for everybody. So good morning to everybody who just came on. It's great to have everybody back this week. So let's get this webinar started. So this is me. I'm not going to go into a huge biographical information about me just because I went through that last week. But my name is Emily Bands. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm a certified psychiatric rehabilitation counselor, and I'm a lecturer in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions in the School of Health Professions here at Rutgers University. I primarily work for a training project for New Jersey State Mental Health Authority, which is why I think Washington has us doing some webinars for Washington State, because it's very similar to the webinars that we present to the providers who work in the mental health field in New Jersey. In addition, I also, before coming over to Rutgers, I've been at Rutgers for a little over a year. I worked in the mental health field in supportive housing in New Jersey for many years. So that's my experience. So last week at the end of the webinar, we had a learning application. So just wanted to check in with everybody. I see a typo, which is going to bother me. So was everybody able to complete the learning application from last week, which I'm going to bring back up. Okay, so who was able to review a service plan focusing on goals and objectives? And if you were able to review a service plan, were you able to identify whether the objective is related or was related to a knowledge, skill, or resource? So was anybody able to do the learning application last week? What did you find if you did do the learning application? I'll give everybody a minute to type some things in. In addition, if you weren't able to do the learning application, does anybody have any questions related to knowledge, skills, and resources? And that's okay, Sarah. You actually didn't have to create a new service plan. It was more about reviewing an already done service plan, but that's okay. So it looks like, in general though, does anybody have any questions about knowledge, skills, and resources? I'm going to start looking at the chat. So it looks like Joel was able to look at a service plan and saw that the objective was related to a skill, as a service plan focused on the clients reducing their anger and anger management strategies. Awesome. Kelly said that you pulled some of your old plans and reviewed them. Awesome. Shelly just put in the chat box the KSR form for anybody who wasn't here last week or for anybody who wasn't able to find the link. This is the form. This is the link again to the form. And then Jessica said that yes, the objectives were based off of resources and skills. So awesome. So it does sound like some people were able to look back at their service plans. And I think it's good to be able to make those identifications on whether or not things are resources and skills, because that's what a lot of individuals are going to need to overcome barriers, right? And barriers are a big part of the service plan out in Washington. So it's really important to be able to think about, as a staff person, collaboratively with your client, what exactly the person needs to know, what skill they need to learn, or what resources they might need in order to achieve that goal, right? Because that's how the person's going to overcome that barrier and potentially achieve their goal, okay? Does anybody have anything else they want to add, or any other questions, concerns, any confusion about the knowledge, skill, and resources form? Just want to give everybody an opportunity to kind of think about that for a minute before we start going into a new topic. No? Okay. So let's move on. Just again, to get an idea, we have about 55 people on the call today. So just to get an idea of who everybody is, I'm just going to do a poll. You can answer all of the questions, some of the questions, but just to kind of get an idea. So what type of FCS program are you currently working in? Supported employment, supported housing, both. What part of Washington do you live in? Where do you currently work? What kind of agency or program do you work for? What your role is where you work, and your experience level, as well as what expectations you have for the webinar today, okay? So take a couple of seconds just to kind of get an idea of who everybody is and what you're all hoping to get out of this webinar today. We tried to do something a little bit different last week. For those of you who were there, you'll remember it didn't quite work out that well. So I decided to go back to the polling route this week. All right, so it looks like we have some people working in both supportive housing and supported employment. Supportive housing, we have, it seems like the majority of people on the training today are in supportive housing. Doesn't look like we have anybody here from Central Washington, but we have a lot of people from the West Side, some people from the East. Thank you all for joining us. We have individuals working at mental health agencies mostly and housing programs, but we do have some individuals at medically focused programs, some employment programs, and some other. So those of you who said that you worked at an other, where exactly is that other, if you don't mind sharing? We have a lot of direct service staff on the call today, on the webinar today, some clinicians, no nurses, some supervisors. We have a lot of people who are new to foundational community supports. So hopefully you all are finding this webinar series to be helpful. And then most of you are trying to obtain new information. Awesome. All right, so these are the results of the poll for everybody who would like to see. So it looks like a majority of people work for both supported housing and supported employment. Mostly everybody's from the West Coast, even though if you are on the East Coast, thank you all for being here. A lot of staff are working for housing programs, lots of direct care staff. Patricia, thank you. So you work for a homeless shelter. Okay. So I'm assuming you're primarily then looking and working, helping individuals work towards finding housing. I'm assuming that's what you do. Awesome. A lot of people new to foundational community supports and a lot of people looking for new information. Okay. So hopefully new information is something that I can provide to you all. So I'm going to end this poll and stop sharing for now, because now we're going to get into what our webinar is actually going to be about today, okay? So normally we have like 3-4 learning objectives, but today we actually just have 2 because we're primarily going to be focusing on the SMART framework today, okay? So we're going to examine the benefits of using the SMART framework when developing an ISP, and then we're going to actually apply the SMART framework when developing goals and objectives on an ISP. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of service planning today. I will let you all know, and this is what our big activity is going to be. So again, if you are having issues with getting audio, if you want to be a part of this activity, I really suggest you do, because this is probably going to be one of the only opportunities you're going to have at developing an actual service plan. But we're going to take you through this whole golden thread process that we've been working on. So we're going to look at an assessment, we're going to look at a KSR, and then we're going to develop some SMART goals and objectives for a service plan. Okay, so I'm really looking forward to this activity. I'm hoping that it goes well. So please make sure that if you want to participate in these breakout groups, that you will, that you have audio. Okay, so SMART framework is what we're going to be focusing on. And the SMART framework is really a part of this development of the individualized service plan, right? So in the first 2 modules with Shelley, you reviewed engagement, you looked at the assessment, which really focuses on assessing medical necessity and assessing strengths and needs, and how the assessment leads to helping an individual identify their personal goal, right? Then last week, you and I, as a group, really looked at a little bit of identifying personal goals more in depth, right? And then we also looked into the steps that go into developing an ISP. We looked at the specific components of an ISP, how it might look. But today we're going to also look at ISP development, but really focusing on creating SMART goals and objectives, okay? So we've seen this diagram before. We're going to go through it a little bit again, okay? So when looking at identified goals to the KSR, we're looking at the comprehensive assessment, which leads to goal identification based on valued life roles, unmet needs, and strengths, okay? Then we have this idea of looking at knowledge, skills, and resources and assessing knowledge, skills, and resources, right? So knowledge, skills, and resources are identified to achieve a goal. But in addition, you collaborate to differentiate between current knowledge, skills, and resources, which are their individual strengths, and then knowledge, skills, and resources that are needed to help the person meet their goal, which is the unmet need, okay? Today, we're really going to be looking at the individualized service plan, okay? So we're looking at the goal, which is the person's hope or desire this thing that this person wants to achieve or attain, whatever that may be. And goals should be written in SMART format, okay? The next piece of the ISP are the barriers, right? These are the things that could potentially prevent the person from attaining their goal, and they're more specifically addressed in the objectives, okay? Next, you have the objectives, which are the steps a consumer needs to take to achieve their goal. And these are the prioritized knowledge, skills, and resources that are also written in SMART format. And then finally, you have the interventions. And the interventions are the different services provided by the staff to the consumer to help the consumer achieve their objectives, okay? So this is the ISP. This is really what we're going to be looking at today, with a larger focus on this idea of the SMART format or the SMART framework, okay? So open-ended question here, right? What does everybody know about the SMART framework? Okay, does anybody know anything about the SMART framework? This came up this came up last week. I know, Joel, you and I were kind of talking about this last week, but what is anybody, or even you, Joel, what do people actually know about the SMART framework? Is it something that you've heard of before? Is it something that you've never heard of at all? Is it something you utilize when you're going over and developing your service plans? What is everybody's knowledge of the SMART framework? So Hannah has heard of it and worked with it. Bailey said it's helpful for operationalizing goals, so taking big goals and breaking them down into clear steps. Awesome. Muriel, you guys use it on service plans. Mason said that you use it for objectives. Okay. So some of you do have some kind of idea of what the SMART framework is. Okay. So everybody keep typing in if you want to share what you know about the SMART framework. While people are still thinking, Sarah said you used it when you were at CDP. Used for objectives. Okay, we have somebody here that's new to the SMART framework. Awesome. Joel, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely are all components, right? Yep, absolutely. But today we're actually going to use a different R. So just to give everybody some background on the SMART framework. So basically, in 1981, this gentleman named George T. Duran, who is a consultant and former director of corporate planning for Washington Water Power Company, published a paper called "There's a Smart Way to Write Management Goals and Objectives." Okay, so he basically started this idea of the SMART framework, at least in a journal, published it. This might have been around before then, but this is the first place we have really seen it, right, back in 1981. So it's used a lot in business, in the business world, for determining what goals the business is trying to focus on or obtain. Because, businesses are trying to make money, but at the same time, when you say, I want to make money, that could mean a lot of different things, right? So it's actually designed to help businesses determine what things they more specifically want to focus on, okay? Yes, Heather, thank you. You used it to set goals for my employees in my previous career. So that's actually something else I was going to say. So SMART is actually also used in performance evaluation or performance planning in other disciplines, in other careers. And in fact, if you actually Google SMART goals, you're going to find plenty of resources that are going to come up with various explanations of what the SMART format is and where it's used. And then again, you might also see some variations about what each letter means. A sometimes means attainable or achievable. For R, we've seen relevant or realistic. T is sometimes timely or time-bound. So there are some variations, but today we're going to focus on this SMART framework, okay? So we're going to focus on S, which stands for specific, which looks at exactly what you want to happen, okay? So when you're being specific, you want to focus on what exactly it is that you are planning on happening, okay? Next, we have M, which stands for measurable. So it should measure to evaluate progress and or barriers, okay? So there should be some kind of measure when it comes to measurability. For A, we're looking at attainable, okay? So this is a goal that should require effort, but should also be within reason, okay? So it should be somewhat hard to attain, but not too hard, okay? Because we want to be able to attain it. And then we have relevant. So relevant means it's consistent with other goals that you currently have in your life, right? So it's relevant within your own life and also requires some kind of commitment from you, okay? And then finally, we have time bound, which is a clear time frame for evaluation, okay? So this is just the gist of SMART. This slide, when you get the PowerPoint, is a great slide to use to just kind of look back at each of these individual letters and what they are. But now we're going to go into much greater detail on what exactly each letter stands for. And we're actually going to do a group activity on trying to make a SMART goal, okay? Because we want to do a lot of practice with SMART goals because it can sometimes take people a little while to get the hang of it, okay? So in regards to specificity, okay, goals should 100% always be specific, okay? They should be as specific as possible and should always state what you want your end result to be in clear and concise words, okay? A good goal statement also explains the what, why, who, where, and when of a goal, okay? Now, you don't always need all of these 5 W's, okay? You don't have to answer every single one of them. You can even answer just 2 to 3 of these 5 W's. And I say this because when I was actually developing this, I was applying it to sort of our example, which I'm going to go over in a little bit. And it was actually pretty difficult for me to figure out and answer each of these W's, okay? So if you're unable to answer every single W in terms of what, why, who, where, and when, that's okay. But you want to be able to answer 2 to 3 because that'll make things more specific, okay? And in addition, if the goal statement is vague, it's going to be very difficult for you to achieve the goal because you're not going to know what exactly it is you're working towards, when exactly you've gotten there, okay? So a common goal that people might have in general is to be happy, okay? But this is super general, okay? Because there's so many ways to become happy. So this statement should be broken down so it will be easier to manage, right? So in thinking about these 5 W's, you might want to think about what needs to change for you to become happy. Why is it that you actually want to be happy? What's going on in your life? Who, if anyone, is going to support you to find this happiness? And where do you need to go to be happy? Do you need to go someplace else? Do you need to stay where you are? And then finally, when exactly will you know you're happy? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this idea of being happy and we're going to make a SMART goal out of it. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to do another poll. We're a little poll heavy today, but we need to make this a smarter goal, okay? So in order to do that, we're going to pick, I've given you 3 options. So we're going to pick one goal out of these 3 different options to make things a little bit more specific, okay? So we're going to improve my happiness by making new friends. I will improve my happiness by saving money, or I will improve my happiness by learning coping skills, okay? So we're going to have I see everybody's voting. So I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to vote because this is going to be the goal that we're going to focus on, okay? And I'm going to write this down because I'm going to need to type this out in a little bit, okay? So that's a great question. So what if the peer doesn't want to make a goal in a specific area of their plan? So can you actually explain that a little bit more for me, just so that I can make sure I'm understanding exactly what it is you're asking? Like, do you mean, what if the person doesn't want to make the goal more specific? Because if that's what you are asking in terms of them saying, well, I don't want to get more specific with this goal, I would be honest with them and really highly suggest that they do, for the reasons I mentioned on the slide, because it's going to be very hard for the person to really know how they've achieved their goal if the goal isn't specific. Oh no, what if they don't want to make a goal at all? Well, then why are they receiving services from you, right? I don't know how it is in terms of with FCS, but I had plenty of clients out here in New Jersey who, oh, that's a great suggestion, Jessica. I like that. So Jessica suggested that sometimes clients don't like the word goals. So absolutely you can change the wording. But I had individuals that I worked with in my program who, were sort of resistant to making a goal. But I explained to them in the beginning when we started providing services to them that that's actually the point of them meeting with me, right? The point of them meeting with you is for them to give you services. You can't know what services they need unless there's some kind of goal, right? So there has to be a service plan that's part of what the job entails, right? So that's sort of this give and take, I guess, in terms of the therapeutic relationship that you both have, right? They need services, but in order to figure out what services they need, there has to be some kind of goal, because the goal lets you know what they want to work on. And then the objectives are how they're going to achieve that. And then the interventions are the different services you're going to provide for them. I hope that that answers your question. And if that doesn't, I would also suggest maybe reaching out to a supervisor just to kind of ask them what the policy is or what the procedure is at your agency. So Jessica said, I just had this yesterday. They said they were happy with where they were and didn't want to set goals. We ended up with 4 goals. They just didn't realize that they were goals until we had a conversation. So that's a great thing, a great point as well, Jessica, right? Because you also have to make sure that you're, having this conversation, fleshing things out. I think going over the wellness assessment that Shelly showed is a great tool to kind of figure out what the person might want to work on if they're unsure or if they're hesitant, right? Joel also mentioned, ask them if they would like to work on something to improve and maybe not use the word goal. Yeah, goal, the word goal can in and of itself can be scary, because if you're working on a goal, you could always fail, right? So that's also something to take into consideration, how you're verbalizing things. So thank you. That was a great question. And thank you everybody who helped provide responses. So getting back to this poll, it looks like the goal that we are focusing on is I will improve my happiness by learning coping skills. Awesome. All right, so you can all see that that was the goal that won in our poll. Thank you for everybody for participating in the poll. So now we're going to move things along and we're going to look at S, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, M. We did S. So M stands for measurable, okay? So you want to make sure that when you're writing a goal, you want to include a unit of measure, okay? And you want to be objective rather than subjective, okay? So you want to ask yourself, when exactly will your goal be achieved? And how will you know it has been achieved, okay? So how are you tracking your progress? How do you know that you've actually reached this goal, okay? So making your goal measurable means adding some kind of number to it, potentially, okay? But you have to be able to track progress and measure the result of the work on your goal in order for it to be measurable, okay? And this could be a simple yes or no question, right? Because if we're focusing on our goal, which is I will improve my happiness by learning coping skills, right? Actually, let me stop myself there. So how can we make our goal more measurable, okay? So let's type in the chat box, but I'm going to try to annotate again. And hopefully I do a little bit better this time than I did last time. So I will improve my happiness by learning coping skills. Okay. How exactly can we make this goal more measurable? Okay. So who wants to give me an example of how we can make this measurable? All right, so Tommy said, I will learn 3 new coping skills. Absolutely, add a number, right? That's probably the easiest way to make something more measurable, right? Is adding some kind of number to it in order to have some way of knowing whether or not you achieve the goal, okay? So learning and applying 2 new skills a week. Catherine said by August 12th. So Catherine, you're kind of jumping ahead a little bit. August 12th kind of is more in line with the timeliness of it, but you're on the right track. Practice coping skills 1 hour per day, practicing the skill 3 times a week. So for everybody who's saying practicing the coping skills 3 times a week, that kind of seems like a step to me to achieve this goal, right? Because the goal, if we look at the language, is to learn the coping skills, right? So it would make sense that one objective would be to look at how you're going to learn that, right? So are you going to read a book? Are you going to research different coping skills? And then a step to that would actually be practicing them. So I think that would be looking more at an objective than making the goal a little bit more measurable. I think we're on the right track here with Tommy saying to learn 3 new coping skills. Right, so Catherine, so research, then take a class. Again, that's making things a lot more specific, but I also feel like that is a little bit more in line with what you're actually going to do to learn the coping skills, okay? And then Hiju said you can track, write down in a journal or spreadsheet how many breakdowns you had in a week and how long they lasted, measure this and see how it's changed over time. And then, okay, so that makes sense. But again, that seems a little bit more like a step the person's going to take to achieve the goal. So Mason's saying that you've been told to make your objective SMART, but not the actual goal, which comes from the client. So you really have to go by what your agency is saying. And from what we've been hearing from everybody out in Washington, just from doing these trainings, is that every agency has something different. So if your agency's policy is to take the goal word for word from the client, then that's exactly what you should do. But not every agency does that. Out in New Jersey, for example, what we do is we can take the quotes of what the client is actually saying in terms of what they want their goal to be, but it's actually still a requirement out here for New Jersey that after you take the quotes, you actually write a SMART goal. So you have to have both. So it really just depends on what your agency is and what your policy and procedure is, but I would still suggest having this conversation with the client just because it's important to make sure you have some kind of a measurability. Because again, if the person's goal is to improve their happiness by learning coping skills, it's not, to me, that's not really giving me enough information as the client for me to realize and know when exactly it is I'm going to achieve this goal. Okay, so make sure you always go by your agency's policies and procedures, okay? So it looks like, actually, let me clear all this. So it looks like we're gonna go with, I will improve my happiness by learning 3 new coping skills. I'm just going to copy this because it's going to be easier to do that. All right, so that's going to be our goal, okay? Okay, I see. So Mason, it looks like you have like a 2-step goal process. So you guys quote the long-term goal and then create short-term goals that incorporate a mental health lens, and then the objective is SMART. Okay, so that makes sense. Okay. But again, you always have to do what your agency tells you to do. All right, awesome. All right, so now let's go to the next piece of this, which is A, okay? So A looks at attainable, okay? So you want to ensure that your goal is feasible in terms of resources available to you, okay? And not necessarily just resources. You also want to look at different knowledge and skills and whether or not you can attain those, right? So this term stresses the importance of goals that require effort but are still within reach. And while it may be a stretch to accomplish the goal, it need not be extreme, okay? So when you're thinking about whether or not a goal is attainable for you as an individual or for the client that you're working with, you really want to look at whether or not what the person needs to achieve that or attain that goal, right? So for our goal, we're looking at whether or not they want to improve their happiness by learning 3 coping skills, right? 3 new coping skills, okay? So in order to determine whether or not this goal is attainable and whether it's attainable and relevant is it's specific to the individual, okay? So this isn't like a one size fits all kind of thing. You really have to have this conversation with the individual that you're working with. But in order to determine whether something's attainable, it's whether or not they can attain that resource, whether or not they can learn that knowledge or attain that knowledge, and whether or not they can learn the skill. Okay, because if the person cannot do that, it's going to be very hard for them to attain and achieve the goal. Okay, so for this one, I will improve my happiness by learning 3 new coping skills. If that's not something that I can do, then it's going to be very hard for me to attain this goal. Okay, and it should be like there should be effort, but it shouldn't have to be like one way or the other, right? So it's very important to look at whether or not the goal is attainable. I hope that that is making sense. If it's not making sense, let me know and I'll try to explain it better. So if we look on the measurability of our goal, okay, would this goal be attainable? Why or why not? Okay, so if I type out our goal again, which is, I will improve my happiness by learning 3 new coping skills. Does this potentially seem attainable? And in order to determine that, think of a client that you're working with, or even think of yourself, right? For me, if I was looking to be more happy, I could definitely learn 3 new coping skills, right? Because I know that I like to read and I like to go on the internet and research things. So for me, this is something that's definitely attainable, okay? So for Tommy, you're saying yes. Mason has a really great point. It depends on the time frame, right? That's a great point, right? So am I going to learn 3 new coping skills by tomorrow? Probably not. But if I gave myself a couple months, I probably could. So that's a really great point, Mason, to think about. And again, looking at the SMART framework, it says SMART and they're in a specific order in terms of with the letters, but this is sort of a fluid process. And that's why when we looked at the slide where I kind of very briefly defined SMART, the arrow was going both ways because this is a fluid process, right? So you're going to be constantly assessing whether or not things are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, okay? But that's a great point, Mason. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so let's say for the purpose of our goal here that a measurable, attainable goal could also be, I will improve my happiness by learning 3 new coping skills. All right, so that's a great point, Joel, and I'm not going to read it because we're going to talk about it now, okay? So R stands for relevant, okay? So the goal should be compatible with your lifestyle and other interests like your current environment, any valued life roles you have, as well as any existing priorities, okay? Actions required to achieve the goal are within your control, and it should be something that you are willing, able, and motivated to work on, okay? A relevant goal will usually answer the question, is this worthwhile in my life, okay? And now I'm going to bring up your point, Joel, which is that this also depends a lot on motivation by the client and how they feel about it, okay? Need their voice and discussion with them so we are not picking objectives for them. And that's 100% true, okay? When you're service planning, this should always be a collaborative process, okay? Because it's their goal. I know I personally don't like it when people tell me what to do or people make choices for me. So I don't think a lot of people like that. I'm sure if I asked everybody, a lot of people would agree that nobody likes people making decisions for them. Nobody likes people making choices for them. And nobody likes people setting goals for them, right? So you have to collaborate, right? surface planning should be a discussion. It should be a back and forth, right? Because you as a staff person have some level of knowledge of the individual, and you have a level of expertise to be able to have some of these more challenging conversations with them and help the individual to flesh some of this information out. And again, the goal, whether or not it's relevant to the person, 100% has to be about motivation and whether or not the person is willing to actually do that objective or work on that goal, right? Because goals can be achieved in a lot of different ways, okay? The 3 coping skills that I might choose to learn in order to increase my happiness or improve my happiness, I'm sure would be very different than the 3 coping skills that any of you out there would want to learn, right? Because I would probably go to the beach more. I would probably, I can't even think of 3 things. But if you can think of 3 things, I'm sure that those 3 things are very individual to you, right? So it's very important to have this conversation. Thank you, Joel, for bringing that up, okay? So just to kind of stay on topic, when thinking of relevant, you want to make sure that you're looking at whether or not it's worthwhile for your life, right? And again, it's specific to the person, okay? So if we look at our goal so far, which is to improve my happiness by learning 3 new coping skills, you really want to ask yourself if it seems realistic and relevant to you, okay? If so, you keep going, right? You keep on going with the SMART process. But if you're concerned that the goal, if you're not concerned with the goal, or this is not a good time in your life to focus on the goal, you should choose something that is motivating to you, right? It all is about motivation, because if it's not worth it, which you see in my little diagram here, my little picture here I created, if it's not worth it to you, you're not going to want to do it, okay? Just to kind of give people an example, and I'm going to give this example because I've used this in New Jersey and it seems to be helpful. When you're thinking about whether or not something is attainable and relevant, this happened to me. I use this for a goal for myself personally, okay? So for me, for a while, I was doing Olympic weightlifting, and it was something that I was doing at the gym. I was going to personal training, and my personal trainer was helping me to learn Olympic weightlifting. I was going 3 times a week. I had a schedule. I was into it. It was making me super happy. It was awesome, okay? But then over time, I decided that financially paying for personal training, it was super expensive for me. So it wasn't really something I wanted to do anymore, that specific task, right? But I decided, like, hey, I still need to go to the gym. This is what I do. I go to the gym 3-4 times a week. This is what I want to do with my life, right? So I quit that gym. I found a new gym. But what I was finding was that I was not motivated at all to go to the gym. And it took me a really long time to really figure out, like, well, what's going on here? For almost 2 years, I was consistently going to the gym 3, 4, 5, sometimes 5 days a week to work out. I was very happy to go, and I was extremely motivated to go. And at some point, my motivation just dropped. And I realized that going to the gym was not a goal that was relevant to me anymore, because it wasn't fulfilling these other things to consider, which is in terms of valued life roles and existing priorities. My valued life role in that sense was not a gym member. It was an Olympic weightlifter. So when I stopped specifically Olympic weightlifting, my valued life role changed, because that wasn't my valued life role anymore. And I was not at all motivated to have the valued life role of gym member. It just wasn't something that I wanted to do. It wasn't something that I was happy with, right? Now my valued life role is more of being a yoga practitioner, right? So you really need to look at what's relevant, okay? And specifically, what is relevant with your lifestyle, what's compatible with your lifestyle and your other interests, right? Because I thought that going to the gym was what I wanted to focus on, but it wasn't. It was the specific activity that I was doing at the gym. And once I stopped that activity, the motivation went away. Okay. So I hope that that was kind of a good example, or another example of whether or not something is attainable and relevant. So far, does anybody have any questions about specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant? Anybody? If you do, type it in the chat box because I'm going to move on to the next one, which is time bound, which is very simple, okay? So you basically want to set a deadline for yourself, and that's what time bound is, okay? So a good goal statement is going to answer the question, when will I achieve my goal? So you want to include a time frame, such as a week, month, or a year, and include specific dates if possible. Without time limits, it's easy to put goals off and leave them to disappear. And in addition, as Mason stated earlier, sometimes the timeliness of things can affect whether or not the goal is attainable and whether or not it's relevant, okay? So if we go back to our activity, okay, what are some ways that we can make our goal time bound, okay? And this is our goal. I lost my box. So how can we make this goal time bound? What can we add? So we know it's specific because we're looking at 3 new coping skills. We know it's measurable because we're looking at 3 skills. We determined it's attainable and relevant to your life, right? But how do we add a time frame? So Tommy said 6 months. I think that somebody else earlier, Catherine said by August 12th, which was a very specific time frame, right? So basically, you just want to add some type of time frame on the end. Now, in Washington State, do your goals, when you're writing service plans, does the consumer's goal have to be the whole time of the service plan? Or do you have some clients that might have a goal for 6 months, but then you might have some other consumers that you work with that might have a goal for 45 days? What's your program like out in Washington? Okay, so Tommy said it's variable and person-centered. That's good. Mason does brief therapy, so all of our goals are for the full 90 days. Sabrina said 6 months. Okay. So it seems like, again, it depends on your agency. So yeah, 28 days. So that's the entirety of the program. That makes sense. Jordan does 90 days for simplicity. And I know that last week when we spoke about reviewing, oh, but that's interesting. 3 weeks to learn 1 skill a week every Friday. Okay. That's interesting. Tammy said it depends on the goal. Okay. So, but for somebody, I think for me, I could probably learn 1 skill a week. But for some of my clients, some of the individuals that I was working with, sometimes it would actually take over a year to learn a skill, depending on what level they're at. So it definitely depends on the goal. Definitely depends on the person. So Melanie said 2 short-term goals for up to 6 months and depends on it, and long-term goal up to 2 years of the program, or Shriner depends on the client. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of depends on the client, which I think is really good because you want to make sure that services are individualized and person-centered. I think in New Jersey, the goals tend to be either 90 days or 6 months or 180 days. So that's interesting. All right. So why don't we then add here, I learned 3 new coping skills in the next 6 months. And that's it. That would be our goal, right? So the fully smart goal would be, I will improve my happiness by learning 3 new coping skills in the next 6 months. So let me just ask you all out there, does this seem like a smart goal to you? Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it attainable and relevant? And is it timely? What do we think? Okay, Kelly, you guys used to do 6-month summaries at your previous employers. Oh, that's interesting. So Tommy said, yes, the goal is smart. So Sabrina asked a good question, and Lance has a good point. So for Sabrina, how are we measuring happiness? So we're not measuring happiness. We're actually, the focus is not on attaining happiness, it's on improving the happiness. And you're doing that by learning 3 new coping skills. So we're not actually, in this instance, measuring happiness. We're measuring whether or not you can learn the 3 new coping skills. And the assumption is that for me, once I learn these 3 new coping skills, it will improve my happiness. So for instance, with my example before, if my objective would be to go to the beach 3 times a week, that would definitely make me happy. I can 100% guarantee that. So that's more of what we're measuring. Absolutely, Lance. Yes, happiness is a vague term, but that's why we made the goal a little bit more specific by focusing on 3 new coping skills, right? And this idea that learning these 3 new coping skills will help the person to become happy, okay? Because if we kind of break it down like I was in terms of learning 3 new coping skills, one of those coping skills is going to the beach 3 times a week, it all kind of connects and flows together. I hope that that makes sense. Linda, I'm not sure what your question is in terms of 1 coping skill per SMART goal. So he just said, so if you could just clarify that a little bit, Linda, just to make sure I understand. So he just said, do you recommend having long and short-term goals in the next 6 months? Sounds like a more long-term one, but having short ones could be good too. So I think this really depends on the person, okay? So again, the way that from what we saw and from the stuff from the information we've received from Washington, the goal is more long-term, okay? And these objectives are actually more of these short-term objectives because again, the objectives are what you're going to do to achieve the goal. It's a step, okay? So when you're thinking about like happiness, okay? Happiness is vague. It's something that's broad. It definitely is long-term. But something more specific and more short-term I could do is something weekly, like go to the beach 3 times a week, or maybe do yoga twice a month, or maybe, you know, binge watch 1 television series 1 Saturday a week, right? These are all things that could help me cope and help improve my happiness, right? So it's about, it's really, I think, in terms of just the terminology that you're using, because again, it's more about what the person wants to achieve and whether or not that is more of a long-term goal or a short-term goal. But what we found in New Jersey with people who are writing service plans is when you sort of get caught up. What the feedback that we've gotten is that when individuals are writing service plans, they are very focused on some of these short-term goals, but you can't break the goal down any further. And the point of it being a goal is so that it can be broken down into these steps. So if you have something like, I will go to the beach 3 times a week, how are you going to break that down? Right? You can't, it's very challenging to break something like that down. And why am I going to the beach 3 times a week, right? I'm going to the beach 3 times a week because that's one of my coping skills in order to improve my happiness. So this idea of this goal and these objectives, they should all funnel into each other. So the intervention is what the staff's going to do to help the person. The objective is what the step that this person's going to take to achieve their goal. And then the goal is this overall thing they want to achieve, okay? So Joel said, this is a great way to achieve a goal, and for clinicians or professionals, we think this way generally, but clients or families do not. I've never heard a person say that I will learn coping skills 3 times a week to improve my happiness. It is just, I want to be happy. I think it is tough for clients to learn this language and then apply it through this mindset. So that's a good point. It is hard, but it's not like, in my opinion, it's not 100% necessary for the clients to take on this language, right? This is more to make it, I guess, make things more concrete, I would say. So it's not more about, to me, it's not really about clients adapting to any language or trying to get used to the language, because you can very much have a conversation with somebody and ask them, you know, what do you want to work on? And the person says, well, I want to improve my happiness. But again, what does that mean? So it's more about kind of fleshing things out. And I'm not sure if this is how you all do things in, I don't know, I'm not sure about how things are done out in Washington, but like out in New Jersey, I was always very like honest with my clients and the people that I was working with that, like, you know, this is kind of the way I have to write things. Like, just to give you all a little sense of what we're doing out here in New Jersey, our service plans are actually sent to a different agency. They're sent to something called the Interim Management Entity. It's the IME, and they provide authorization for our Medicaid services. So once I write a service plan, I have to send it to be reviewed by a clinician. Most of the time, the goals that I was writing were actually sent back to me because the IME stated that they weren't smart enough. So most of the time, the things that I spoke about with the individual was not even what ended up on the final ISP. But we needed that for Medicaid billing service purposes. So I was just having constant conversations with the individual that, like, yes, this is what we talked about. This is the general gist of what we're working on. Unfortunately, this is the language that we had to use. And people were always okay with that. And then Tommy pointed out, I think this is where a conversation happens, asking them what they think will make them happy, will give it clarity. Yeah. And that's really what I think the importance is and why we're looking at SMART format, is because it needs to be clear. Because again, if something is not SMART, if it's not specific enough, if there's no way to measure it, if it's not attainable, if it's not relevant, and there's no time frame, it's going to be really hard for the person to actually achieve that goal. So Sabrina, her agency wants to see something like, I will improve my happiness from a 6 to a 9 by self-report within the next 6 months. So it seems like your agency uses some kind of scaling, which is great. We have a lot of agencies out here that do that to develop objectives. Yep. And then I would ask, what does that look like, and pull short-term goals from the answer. I will be able to go to the beach more. I could spend more time with my kids. My kids want to spend time with you. Yeah, absolutely, right? What does happiness look like to them? And that's how you get those short-term goals and objectives. That's a great point, Mason. Okay. So really, in the essence of what we're talking about here, SMART is really just to make things more clear, more concise, and really give individuals an idea of how exactly they're going to achieve their goal. Because I mean, how many of you have ever made a New Year's resolution? Anybody out there has ever made a New Year's resolution? Sabrina said, oh yeah. I think Sabrina knows where I'm going with this. So how many of you have made a New Year's resolution, and within the first month of the new year, Kelly, yes, that like really works. So how many people have made a New Year's resolution in the first month and said something like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to do this, and then it doesn't happen, right? Sarah, no, because I don't want to set myself up to fail, right? I will guarantee, and I would actually challenge all of you, and you guys can all feel free to email me. Next year, when you decide you want to set a New Year's resolution, make it a SMART goal. Make it a SMART goal and see if that's easier for you to achieve. And if it's not, let me know. Send me an email, because I will I'll put it out there that if you had that goal in more of a SMART format, you might be more likely to attain that goal and to achieve the goal, because that's what SMART does. SMART helps you to achieve goals. Okay. All right. So I like this discussion. I think this was a really interesting discussion. And just to let everybody know, we're really good on time. So yeah, awesome. Thank you all for participating in the discussion. All right, so let me clear this so I can get rid of the annotate. All right, so now we're gonna do another poll. And again, I apologize, we're really poll heavy today, but we're just gonna do one more poll, and we're just gonna do some practice, and then we're actually gonna get into the activity, okay? So, is this a SMART goal? Okay, so I have four goals up here, and I want you to tell me yes or no whether or not this is a SMART goal. Okay, so the first one is, I will move into a 1-bedroom apartment in Pierce County in the next year. The second one is, I will find a job. The third one is, I will learn skills needed for a job. And the fourth one is, I will learn 2 skills needed to manage symptoms of my depression in the next 45 days. So which ones are SMART goals, yes or no? Let's think about it. I'll give everybody a couple minutes to answer. And thank you all for participating in the goal. I really appreciate in the poll. I really appreciate it. Okay. So we have about 42 people who have voted. Let me give everybody another minute. Well, not another minute, because that would be way too long. So I'll give everybody another couple of seconds. If you want to vote in the poll, if you don't want to vote in the poll, that's okay. All right, we have a couple more people. Give it another 5 seconds. All right, so I'm going to end the poll. Thank you, everybody, for voting. All right, so the first one, I will move into a 1-bedroom apartment in Pierce County in the next year, okay? 87% or 39 people said that this was a SMART goal. So yes, I did write this as a SMART goal. For those of you who answered no, if you want to share, why did you say that no, this was not a SMART goal? Did you feel like it wasn't specific enough? Did you feel like it wasn't measurable, attainable, relevant, or timely? What did you all think? Okay, so Lance said very vague time frame. That's a good point. The way I did write it is a little vague because I only said in the next year, right? So Lance said this would not be accepted at our agency. Okay, I'll agree with you on that, Lance. Now that I'm looking at it, saying in the next year probably isn't a good enough time frame, just because there's no date to it, right? So when exactly is this next year? Okay, so I'll agree with you on that, Lance. I hear you on that one. Okay. Anybody else? Was it the time frame? All right, so let's move on to number 2. I will find a job. So majority said no, this is not a SMART goal. 4 people said yes, though. Does anybody want to share what their viewpoint was on whether or not this was a SMART goal? I purposely made this goal not really specific because realistically, yes, I said a job, but you could be more specific on whether or not it's a volunteer job, a part-time job, or a full-time job. So that could definitely be more specific. But there's no time frame. And with this one, in terms of measurability, this could potentially be measurable because it's yes, did I find a job, or no, did I find a job? And that is a way to measure, but it definitely was not specific enough. It definitely was there was no time frame, okay? If we move on to number 3, I will learn skills needed for a job. 36 people said no, 9 people said yes. So I did write this as not a SMART goal. For those of you who said yes, if you wanted to share why you thought it was a SMART goal, but I purposely did not identify what skills or how many skills I would use. I could even get more specific and say I will learn 2 new interviewing skills, or I will learn 2 new communication skills, or just say 2 skills needed. But the question is always going to be, well, what skills are needed for a job, right? Is it to find the job? Is it actual on-the-job skills? There's definitely some questions there. And again, there's not really a time frame, okay? And then finally, I will learn 2 skills needed to manage symptoms of my depression in the next 45 days. So 1 person said no. So the 1 person who said no, I'll ask again, did you want to share why you didn't think this was a SMART goal? But I did say 2 skills, so it was very specific. was specific about what these skills are for, which is to manage symptoms of depression. There is some measurability to it, because if the person learns 2 skills, then they have achieved their goal. If they only learned 1 skill, then they wouldn't have achieved their goal. And there's a time frame. So, you know, for a shorter term program, you might be able to learn 2 new skills in the time frame. It's really dependent on the person. All right, so good. It sounds like you all are getting a pretty good idea of what SMART goals are. So that's really good. I'm going to stop the poll now. All right, so now we're going to move on to our activity. Again, this is going to be the last time I'm going to sort of shout this out, but if you, maybe I have to stop sharing. So if you have not done so, okay, if you could please, if you want to go on, and participate in this activity, please connect to audio. If you're not connected to audio, it's going to be a little challenging for you to do this activity. So what I'm going to do is go through these steps, okay? Now once, oh, thank you, Shelly. Shelly put the call-in information in again. All right, so this is going to be a 3-step activity, okay? So as a larger group, which is us right now, we're going to review the background information of this individual I'm going to share with you all, okay? So I have some demographic information on her, I have an assessment that I did for her, and I have a knowledge, skills, and resources form that I filled out for her, okay? Then in breakout groups, you guys are going to develop 1 SMART goal and 3 SMART objectives, okay? I also want you to identify in your breakout group someone to report back to the larger group, okay? Just so that it's a little bit more streamlined when we're coming back into the larger group, so that multiple people from the group aren't answering for the same thing. So just identify 1 person, okay? We have about 59 people, actually probably 57 if you don't count Shelly and I. So I'm probably gonna put people into like maybe groups of 4 or 5, just so that there's a nice amount of people in each group. And then after 10 to 15 minutes, we're all going to come back to the larger group and we're going to discuss, okay? So I'm giving people plenty of time. I can actually probably give people the full 15 minutes, maybe give a little bit more if you guys let me know that you need more time. But we're going to really take time to do this. The other thing, if Shelly, if you will put this into the chat box also, is I created a PDF with all of the individual's background information, because I'm pretty sure once we go into the breakout groups, I'm going to have to stop sharing, and you guys aren't going to see this information anymore, okay? So I have a shareable link for everybody that's going to have the demographic information, the assessment, and the knowledge, skills, and resources form, okay? As well as the directions for the activity, okay? And thank you, Shelly. Shelly just put that into the box, okay? I mean, into the chat box, all right? So here we have our demographic information, okay? Oops, let me go back. So we have Samantha, okay? So Samantha is a 66-year-old female who has been diagnosed with depression and anxiety since her mid-20s, okay? She's lived with her husband. However, he recently passed away, leaving Samantha unable to independently pay for her rent, okay? She has a 28-year-old daughter who's supportive of other needs, but is unable to assist Samantha with housing. Samantha is still dealing with the grief of losing her husband and finds the process of moving daunting. Her symptoms of her anxiety and depression have increased recently. And there's a typo on there. I apologize for the typo, okay? So this is Samantha. She's 66 years old. Her husband recently died, and because of that, she cannot afford to pay her rent, okay? If you're wondering why she can't afford to pay her rent, I'm going to show you now, okay? So here's the assessment. I did the wellness assessment on her. And in regards to her environmental and housing, okay, she's currently at a 2. She would like to be a 3, okay? So Samantha reports that she is currently at a 2 since she can no longer afford to pay for her apartment on her own, as her income is not enough to support her $1,700 a month rent, okay? In order for her to move from a 2 to a 3, Samantha reports that she will need to downsize to find a studio or smaller one-bedroom apartment for less than $1,100 per month, okay? So again, she's looking for a studio or a smaller one-bedroom that has a rent of less than $1,100 a month, okay? In regards to her emotional and mental health, Samantha reports that she is currently at a 2, as she is still dealing with the sudden death of her husband, in addition to the stress of having to find a new apartment and move. Samantha reports that in order to move to a 3, she would like to find a new apartment and move as quickly and simply as possible in order to reduce her stress level, okay? So losing her husband, understandably so, is affecting her emotional and mental health, as well as this idea of moving, because moving, as we all know, is very, very stressful, okay? She was a 2 and she would like to be a 3, okay? Finally, for financial, okay, she's currently at a 3. She wants to stay at a 3, okay? So Samantha reports that she is currently at a 3 in her financial wellness. Although she will be able to claim her husband's Social Security benefits, her husband was continuing to do electrical work as he was a licensed electrician on the side to help supplement their income. Samantha reports that this extra income gave them enough money to pay their rent, as well as debts they were still paying off that she will now be responsible for paying on her own. Samantha reports that in order to stay at a 3, she will need to downsize to a smaller one-bedroom or to a studio apartment in order to make up for her husband's extra income, okay? So this is why Samantha has to move, okay? Her husband was making extra money, which was able to supplement her income, and her husband was already on Social Security. She will still be able to collect that Social Security, but that extra money was actually paying off some of their debts, which she is now going to have to pay on her own. So that $600 difference, she's going to have to make up for, okay? So that's why she needs to downsize to an apartment for $1,100 or less, okay? I hope that's clear to everybody. If you have any questions so far, feel free to type them in the chat box, okay? And then finally, we have her knowledge, skill, and resource assessment, okay? So the goal here is for her to find a new apartment, okay? And in terms of knowledge, she identified that she has a good understanding of the price range she needs to stay in. She has a good idea of where exactly she would like to live. However, she doesn't know how to manage the stress caused by her moving, okay? She needs education in that area. And then where to purchase moving supplies. So she has some understanding, but needs some more information on that, okay? In regards to skills, she needs some practice with researching an apartment. She can purchase moving supplies on her own. She's going to need some assistance with filling out apartment applications. And she's going to need to learn how to cope with her stress, because right now her stress level is very high. In terms of organizing the move, that's not something that she needs any help with. She can perform that on her own, okay? And then in terms of resources, she's going to need moving supplies, which is boxes, tape, and bubble wrap. She's going to need a mover company. She's not going to need any of her documents for apartment application. She has all that, but she is going to need help moving, okay? So this is the knowledge, skill, and resource assessment that was completed on her, okay? So that's it in terms of information for her, okay? So again, please download the link. The link for this has everybody. The link has all this information, so please make sure you pull this up. So I'm just gonna go back to this, okay? So again, just to go over the directions again, you're gonna develop 1 SMART goal and 3 SMART objectives. The link is right here. The link is right here. And again, this link should have everything, okay? So you're going to develop 1 SMART goal and 3 SMART objectives, okay? And then after 15 minutes, we're going to come back, okay? So it's about 1:46. Give me a couple minutes to put everybody into breakout groups. Again, I'm going to try to put 4 to 5 people in a breakout group, and then we are going to get started with the activity, okay? So let me stop sharing. Aha, okay. So we're going to do 5 to 6 participants in a room. All right, that should be good. All right, so um, all right, Shelly, if you're there, I can't take you out of the breakout group. So just don't go into it. Unfortunately, I can't, it's not letting me do it. And I'm just going to move one person to breakout room 4 to kind of make up for that. All right, so I'm going to open all the rooms. All right, Emily, I'm sorry your firewall is blocking the link. Hopefully someone else in the group will be able to share the link. So I'm going to put everybody in breakout groups. It's about 1:48. So 15 minutes from now will be 48. Oh. All right. I'm going to put everybody in breakout groups. I'll let everybody know when you have about 5 minutes left, okay? So we're probably looking at 58. Somewhere around like, your guys are at 10, like 10:06, 10:07, okay? So I'm going to open all the rooms. Everybody should be going.
Hello.
Hello. I'm going to start recording again.
Oh.
And let me share my screen again so we can go back to the PowerPoint.
Oh.
All right, everybody's back. So I'm just going to go ahead and mute everybody, since that was what we had before. So I'm just going to go ahead and mute everybody. All right, awesome. So it looks like everybody is muted, and everybody should be back at this point out of the breakout rooms. So I hope message here. Wait, hold on. Okay, Joel was wondering if you can unmute those who might be sharing groups. Yeah, if people want to be unmuted and you're going to be sharing, I can definitely unmute you. If not, you can just put it in the chat box. It's really what people are comfortable for. I don't want to make anybody speak if they don't want to. So it's really up to you guys. So I guess figure out if you would like to be unmuted. Joel, when it's your go around, we could definitely do that. I'm going to go here. So first, we're going to think about what SMART goal and objectives did you come up with, okay? So who would like to go first? Who wants to share? Who's open to sharing with us? Okay, so Joel wants to go first. Everybody else, let us know. Okay. Oh, Joel, I think Shelly unmuted you, so here you go. Have at it.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So the goal we came up with was Samantha will move into a 1-bedroom apartment within 3 months to help with her finances.
All right. So Joel's goal was that Samantha is going to move into a 1-bedroom apartment within 3 months to help with her finances, right? That was the gist of it?
Correct.
All right. All right. So for that goal, for Joel's goal, what does everybody think? Does everybody think that was a smart goal? Can everybody agree on that?
And that was for our team. I guess it wasn't just for me, you know.
Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah.
of course. So does everybody think that that was a smart goal? Oh, Kelly, your group said you said something similar. Awesome. All right. Yes. All right. Yes, I would definitely agree. That sounds like a great SMART goal. So what objectives did you guys come up with? Or you people, individuals? What objectives did you all come up with? Joel, can you hear me?
Oh, for me? Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought
That's
you meant
okay.
everybody. I was all
No.
waiting. Okay, so
No. What
Um,
goal? What objectives?
so Samantha, we kind of used her words. So she said, I will identify and apply for 4 apartments within my budget in the next month. So that was one short-term objective. Second one, I will learn and implement 2 coping skills a week to help with the stress of my move.
Okay.
So that was working on her stress, which she said in, I think, knowledge and skills maybe. And then the third one was, I will establish a budget to help with moving and purchasing moving supplies within 3 weeks.
Okay. I like those. I think those were really good objectives. They definitely all link back to the goal, right? Because we want to make sure that the goals and objectives and the interventions all link with each other. Does everybody agree that those objectives were pretty smart?
We did say something about wanting to research moving companies, but we thought that the budget would probably be more important, more of a priority, because without the money to know how much to spend for moving companies, that was kind of our first step, even though they kind of go hand in hand. So
Right. The only thing I would mention is in terms of what did you say you guys were thinking of researching again?
Researching moving companies, like for
Right.
supplies, or if we need to buy those ourselves, or
So that could potentially be even like an intervention with one of the, like with the last objective, right? Because that would go along with her budget, right? So those can kind of connect. So that could potentially be some kind of intervention. The only thing I will say though is for the first objective, when you said identify and apply to 4 apartments within the budget, it might be helpful to say what the budget is, which was $1,100. You could be a little bit more specific, but that's just, it's, it really doesn't matter. It just might be helpful. It really depends, like you said, on what kind of language the person wants to use. So awesome. And it seems like everybody agrees that those were definitely smart objectives. So my next question is going to be, what was your group's process for developing the SMART goals and objectives? How did you prioritize things?
Well, for us, it was the budget was kind of the first piece of it, because even with I will identify and apply for 4 apartments with the first objective we had, the budget is kind of the priority with that. So
right.
I think we prioritized that. And then also we looked at her stress level, because that was within the knowledge. I think it was a knowledge and skills, if I don't have it in front of me, that she said she wanted to learn things for her stress. So that was kind of the other priority.
Okay. And then did you guys have any challenges with figuring anything out?
I think it was just being more specific. We did say for one of the coping skills, we were looking at meditation. Somebody said, I will learn meditation skills to help with my stress. And then somebody else was saying, well, maybe let's branch that out. Let's make that a little more broad, because if meditation is what she's wanting to go with, absolutely we should do that. But we should look at just 2 coping skills, because then that gives her kind of a variety of different things to look at rather than just meditation.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, right? You want to be specific, but there's sort of a fine line you have to walk on in terms of how specific you want to be, because it's almost, and we talk about this a lot in New Jersey, it's almost like you want to be not so broad, but also not so specific, because you do want to make allowances depending on, what exactly it is the person wants to do. Because you could make, obviously it would be a little different if you were actually meeting with Samantha and she was right in front of you, but you could bring that up to Samantha and Samantha might say, yeah, I want to do meditation. And then maybe she's not really sure what meditation is. And you put it on the ISP and then you're finally working on that. And she's like, well, oh, that's what meditation is. I didn't know that that's what that was. I can't do that. Right. So it is better to keep it broader. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel, for sharing. I hope you guys found this experience and this process helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Our team was good.
Good. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to mute you again, Joel, and we're going to get back to the chat box. So I had a couple people. So Lance said that their goal was, okay. So Lance brought up that you would have mentioned the $1,100 to be more specific. Absolutely. Kelly's, I think you said your goal was similar, but instead of in 30 days, you said 60 days. So let's go to Kelly's group. So Kelly, your goal, what was your SMART goal? Was it to, if you want to share, do you want to share, Kelly? I don't want to make anybody share that doesn't want to share.
Okay, so our SMART goal was to get moved into a 1-bedroom apartment within the next 60 days.
Okay, 1-bedroom apartment within the next 60 days. Very specific. Why did you pick the 60-day time frame?
Because it usually takes a little while to find a place, and when reading the form, the document there, mm-hmm. her being stressed out, not having the money, it will give her some time to get that money together. And then as we go through the steps and stuff where the medications come into play and mm-hmm. all that. So it just takes a little bit of time to get to that point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And it's, again, what's going to be relevant and attainable to her, right? So maybe in the case with Joel's group, maybe she already gave her notice at this point, right? So if she gave her notice, you got to get out of there. So it's a smaller time frame, whereas maybe in your scenario with Samantha, she had a little bit more time, right? So that's a great point. And I definitely think your goal was smart. What kind of objectives did you guys have for your goals?
So our first one was to have someone help her, teach her how to do the research to complete apartment applications and to do the apartment research. Mm-hmm. And that was, just to help her with the apartment applications. And the second part was to research the sites 2 hours a day, 4 days a week.
Okay. So for the first one with the applications, it sounds like that was more of an intervention or written more as an intervention.
Yes.
So you would definitely want to maybe potentially, if you felt like you wanted to, that would need to be more of like written in an objective, like maybe, I will apply to 4 apartments or something similar to that. Just because that definitely sounds a little bit more about what the staff's going to do to help Samantha achieve that, as opposed to as opposed to like staff doing whatever with her, you know what I'm saying? So it definitely was written a little bit more as an intervention.
That's what it was.
No, and that's okay, right? And that's why I think one of the really good things about SMART format is, in my opinion, when you're going through the SMART format, you're really looking at like it's helping you to kind of break things down, right? Because you know what exactly staff's going to do with the person by what the client or the consumer has to do, if that makes sense, right? So if Samantha's trying to fill out applications, if that's something she needs to do like maybe once a week, then that staff's going to meet with her once a week in order to do that. So that's a really good point. Okay. And what was your process for developing the goals and objectives? How did you prioritize things?
We were just discussing amongst the 3 of us how we were going to put it into order, and we just felt that one was the best one to start out with. Mm-hmm. An hour a week, having somebody help her complete apartment applications and to show her how to do the research to find apartments that would fit her need. And then the second part came with the research, 2 hours a day, 4 days a week.
Okay. All right.
And then our third part was just to follow up with her doctor for medications to help with her depression and anxiety. And then True brought up the meditation as well, like Joel had mentioned.
Right.
But we didn't get very far before we got cut off. We
Sorry
were still
about that.
in a lot of conversation trying to work it together, you know,
Right.
as a team. So.
Okay. Well, that sounds really great. And I'm sorry for everybody that I had to cut you guys off.
Yeah, okay.
But it's good, right? Having that collaborative conversation, those are the kinds of conversations you definitely want to have with the consumer. Other than maybe the timing, was there any other challenges that you all had?
No, not really. I don't think so. I think we worked really well together as a team and just tried to work best with what was best for the client.
Okay. Awesome. All right, great. So hopefully you all found this process to be helpful. And it sounds like it was helpful to you guys to be able to break everything down. So great. Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for speaking to the crowd. I appreciate it. Okay. All right. So I see that Riley is in the chat box. So Riley's group, your SMART goal was Samantha will go from a 2 to 3 on a scale of 1 to 5 with emotional well-being. So I guess you're going to increase the emotional well-being from a 2 to a 3 by 10, 28, 20. The first objective was for Samantha to apply for 2 apartments a month through 10, 28, 20 to help her find a new place to live and share progress with her PC during a 30 to 60-minute session. I'm assuming the PC is the service, like the direct care staff. Objective 2 is Samantha will obtain a mental health assessment through Cascade Behavioral Health in Pierce County by 10, 28, 20. Objective 3 is Samantha will budget $120 a month through 1028 to help her obtain funds for moving supplies and costs. And then objective 4, Samantha will reach out to at least one community support, which may include church, family, or community meetings through 1028. So I like how all of this flows, Riley. She's going to go from a 2 to a 3 in regards to emotional well-being by 1028. There's definitely a specific time frame. She's going to apply to 2 apartments a month to help find a new place. And then I think it's interesting, and Kelly's group kind of touched on this also in terms of linkages to mental health services, which I think was very interesting because I wasn't specific in the information I gave you guys in terms of whether or not Samantha has mental health services outside of the services that you all would be providing to her. So linking to her to other behavioral health services in terms of like getting assessed for medication or maybe even therapy, she just lost her husband. So addressing her grief, the stress, I think that's a really great objective. And then budgeting money. So it seems like similar to Joel. All right, so I'm going to get there, Tommy and Joel. So in terms of so funds for moving supplies, $120 again, very specific. And then Samantha will reach out to at least one community support, which may include church, family. And that's kind of where including and involving social supports can also help with emotional well-being. Okay. So now Tommy and Joel, I feel like your comments are pretty similar in terms of clarifying emotional wellness. And Tommy questioned how the objectives directly relate to the goal. So this is sort of where, and this is challenging because it sounds like some of your agencies you guys have to use the scaling. Sometimes scaling can be hard because sometimes scaling is not specific enough. It is a good way to measure, but it's not always specific enough. And again, I always will say, like, go back to your agency and what the plans look like at your agency. If there's a specific format that you have to follow, I'm assuming for Riley and her group, that's what this is. It's a specific format you all are following. But you could be a little bit more specific about what emotional well-being actually means. and how that looks. Joel has a pretty good example in terms of increasing happiness or peace of mind. But again, it really depends on how this flow looks in your agency. I will say though that I think, Sabrina said, okay, Sabrina, that's actually a really great point. And I think this actually might relate a little bit more to the interventions, which Shelly's going to talk about next week, in terms of what's everybody's scope of practice. So I'm going to save that. Make sure you keep that point for next week, because I don't want to get too much into interventions. But in terms of it linking, I do see the link, because she does need to find a new place, and that's reiterated in the assessment. So there is a link in the assessment, right? She does need to find a new place to live. The mental health assessment definitely affects her emotional well-being. And then moving supplies relates to that. And then the community supports definitely relates to that. But you could potentially make it a little bit more specific in terms of what the emotional well-being is, okay? And then Charlene said Samantha will attend a grief class once a month. Okay. Yeah. Again, like I just want to point out, other than the examples, and then I need to wrap things up because we have about 5 minutes left, but other than the examples that I gave you all earlier when we did the, poll, in terms of saying something like, I will find a job, that is 100% not enough, okay? But it really depends on the person that you're working with. It depends on what agency you're working at and what policies and procedures and expectations there are in terms of service planning. There's a lot of components that go into this. So you really always want to follow that. But, there really isn't a wrong answer, okay? As long as you can justify that it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, that's really all that matters. And as long as your supervisor is okay with it, and as long as it follows the golden thread, that's what really matters. You can always be more specific. You can always be more measurable. You can always have a better time frame. I feel like you can always keep going back and working on these things. So you just want to make sure that you're doing enough. And, this was over a 15-minute period that you guys had this conversation. So just keep that in mind as well. And I have some praise going on here in the chat before I wrap things up for Emily, because you guys said your group included intervention of having a yard sale within the first month to help downsize what she has to move and to create some more funds for moving supplies. So that wouldn't necessarily be an intervention. It would be an objective. And the only reason why I'm clarifying that is because interventions are what the staff is going to do to help the person. The objective is what the client or the consumer is going to do to help to achieve that goal. And that's actually a really great idea, Emily, right? Because I'm sure if she's in a bigger apartment and she's downsizing to a studio, that's going to be a lot of work, right? So that's a great point, okay? So thank you all for your participation in the activity. I hope you all found the breakout activity to be helpful. Just so that we can get things moving, the next webinar is going to be on ISP intervention development. It's going to be next Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and 12:30 p.m. for me and Shelly. But thank you all. Shelly just put in the chat box for the next registration. I'm happy you found it super helpful, Joel. For the next training, in terms of a learning application, we want you all to review an ISP. So you don't have to do the service plan. We want everybody to just review the service plan. And we want you to focus on the goal and objectives and determine whether or not the goal and objectives are in SMART format. If they are not in SMART format, it's 9:30, Joel, not 9 a.m., 9:30. If they are not in SMART format, we want you to think about whether or not there's specificity, if there's a way to measure progress or achievement, is it attainable or relevant, and is it time bound? Okay, so if the goal and objectives are not SMART, we want you to think about how you can make them SMART. okay? Shelly also put in the chat box the link to our training evaluation. It's a very short training evaluation. It would be super helpful if you guys could fill it out. Shelly and I are always looking for more feedback. Doing webinars and doing online trainings is something we've had to get used to a lot over the past couple months. So any feedback you can give to us would be extremely helpful. And then we have about a minute or two for questions. So does anybody have any other questions before we go? Type them in the chat box. Again, everybody, thank you all so much for being here this morning. I hope you all found the training to be helpful and the information to be helpful. I appreciate you all. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate you all taking the time to go into the breakout groups. I saw a lot of people in the breakout groups, and I hope that you guys found the activity helpful. If there is anything that you felt didn't work with the activity, please put it in the evaluation. This is the first time we've done an activity like this. So any feedback on that would also be helpful. But again, if you all have done the evaluation, which hopefully you did, thank you all for being here. It was I appreciate everybody's participation and everybody taking, this time in the morning to come on and participate. So once again, I hope everybody found it helpful. I'll give another minute for people to ask any other further questions. And, have a great rest of the week. And Shelly and I will see you next week. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'll just stay on for another minute in case anybody has any other questions. But thank you, everybody. Awesome, Yuju. Thank you so much. I'm happy you like the breakout groups and the activities. That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so it's 2:30 my time, 9:30, 11:30 your time. If you give me 1 second, I will give you the registration link. Hold on a second. There's the link, Maria, if anybody else needs it. So I'll give everybody another minute in case you all need the link for registering. But once again, thank you all. I appreciate everybody being here. I hope you guys, again, found the information helpful. Okay. All right. So with that, enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you next week.